After Harding comes Calvin Coolidge. He becomes president. He's called Silent Cal. Silent Cal doesn't say anything. He is noted for he's just the quietest guy ever. Kind of a weird little guy. He's going to continue Harding's economic policies of limiting government, low taxes. For a time, labor unions' power is going to decrease. Workers' wages are going to rise. Things are going well. As Coolidge says, the business of America is business. And he does anything he can to promote business. Silent Cal, one of my favorite Cal and Coolidge stories is that for fun, you have to remember the Secret Service protects the president. Well, for fun, Coolidge would go into the White House, there, and there's a bell that you ring for the Secret Service, and he would ring the bell, and then he would go hide behind the curtains and at the window and watch the Secret Service run around and try to find him. He thought that was fun. He was a very interesting guy. Coolidge does do something important here. The Indian Citizenship Act, finally, Indians get the right to vote in 1924. So Coolidge has passed these things. Coolidge takes over as president, and America continues. The business of America is business. Okay. Pause here. Things are going well. Between 1922 and 1929, there's a lot of migration from farms to towns. The people are moving into the cities. Some of the rural areas, we talked about the Scopes monkey trial, but in a lot of cases, the moral values, the conservative moral values of the rural areas are lost as people move to the city, and they jump into this new urban scene. The cities start to rise. New York, San Francisco, all the big cities that you're familiar with start to really pick up in population. And in a lot of ways, the 20s become a clash between the small town values and the big city values. But as more and more people are drawn towards the cities, things are changing, and America's morals are going to change a little bit. Pause here. The 20s consumer has the ability to buy more stuff than they've ever bought before. Wages and productivity increases. Taxes are really low. People had all kinds of money to spend. The average annual income rises more than 35%. That's a huge jump during the 20s. But something dangerous comes this way. It's called buying on installment plan. You're going to buy, let's say, a car, and you can put down payment. It's like buying on credit. The installment plan becomes very popular as people start to buy actually more than they have. They're spending more than they have. This is credit. This is like credit cards are coming into play here for the 20s consumer as they start to buy and buy and buy. They're going to get in trouble here towards the end of the 20s because of credit. Okay, so, pause here. 20s period of real big dynamic cultural changes, especially in the city, as all these people move into the cities. When we say all these people, we're talking about people coming from the country, people coming from out of the country, immigrants from all over the place. Newspapers and magazines are very popular, and they're going to push the cultural norms and spark fads. The newspapers and magazines of the day are like TV. Remember, there's no TV yet. So when we talk about fads today, we usually see them on TV. Well, newspapers and magazines are going to push these fads. Newspapers and magazines are very popular. Washington, D.C. has 4 or 5 different newspapers in comparison to today, where we have basically one at this point. But everybody reads magazines, everybody reads newspapers, and they're going to push cultural fads, like the Charleston here, as you see people doing a nice little dance. All right. Pause here. 1920s women. A lot of them are going to be called flappers. Here's the traditional flapper look with the little hat, cute skirt and boots, usually with big necklaces and stuff. These flappers are young women who embrace the new fashions. These are the new fashions. Very rebellious, much less conservative as they move to the city and they get away from their families and start to do what they want to. They're famous for going to speakeasies and hanging out in saloons and bars. The idea of a flapper is a young girl who really stretches her morals and values and goes out and explores the world. Many women were not flappers, but women start to take into work, starting with World War I. A lot of them are working in women's professions, teachers, nurses, things like that. Birth rates decline because women are out there working and women are marrying later, moving out to the city. women become more of an equal partner in marriage as they hold down jobs and do things. 19th Amendment is going to pass, giving women the right to vote in the 1920s. So the 1920s is a big change for women as they start to get out in the world and do some things that they haven't been able to do before. Pause here. The 1920s is called the Roaring Twenties mainly because of jazz. It's also called the Jazz Age. Okay, the Roaring Twenties are the Jazz Age. Jazz is an American-born music. Evolves from ragtime music, basically down in New Orleans, down that way. Becomes very popular in the 20s. Blues music, classical, even some classical music, very popular at this time. Why so much music? Why do we mention music? This is the first time we've ever really mentioned music. Because of a new invention. The radio is going to allow people to hear music at home. For the first time, you don't have to go out and listen to music. Now you can stay home and listen to some of this stuff. And music becomes popular. Recording artists become very popular because of their radio appearances, not necessarily because of their local appearances. Some of the leading purveyors of music, Duke Ellington is a big jazz guy. Okay, Duke Ellington grew up in Washington, D.C., a local guy. Bessie Smith, another big blues singer. You also notice she's got Louis Armstrong, one of the fathers of the blues. George Gershwin writes many classical movement music here during this time period. So music really begins to take off. The whole idea of music as entertainment really picks up here during the Jazz Age. Pause here. After World War I, also we've got American writing flourishing. This becomes a great era for literature in American history. Two big groups of writers. One was the Harlem Renaissance. These are a group of writers who focus on African Americans. The biggest representative of those group was Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes, great African American poet, as they focus on what's going on in the African American community. That's why it's called the Harlem Renaissance, because a lot of African Americans lived in Harlem. Second group is called the Lost Generation. These are people. The Lost Generation was a generation of young people who came of age right after World War I. And they're struggling to find their place in the world, and they're writing about disillusionment with the world and how they see things, and how the world is changing. These people include Ernest Hemingway, who's going to write The Sun Also Rises, one of the great books. Gertrude Stein, F. Scott Fitzgerald is going to write The Great Gatsby, something you may have written or may have read. So some writing, some culture going on as America really begins to pick up its own culture. For much of our history, we have drawn from French and English culture. Now, in the 20s, we begin to create our own culture with our own writers and our own music and our own stuff. Okay, we're really coming into our own in culture. Pause here. Sports. We got more income, you got more leisure time. Baseball, Babe Ruth becomes very important. Man of War, one of the great horses of all times. Jack Dempsey, the boxer. These are the most popular sports by far: horse racing, boxing, baseball. Okay, so we've got more time, more leisure, and sports pickup. Pause here. So the 20s is roaring right along. Radio becomes something that most people have in their homes. New form of communication. That's what's bringing you that music. That's what's bringing you news. That's what's connecting you to other people around the world. New appliances, things like the refrigerator, the toaster, all kinds of cool stuff. Make living at home more convenient, frees up time for people to do other things. Pause here. The big game changer, the automobile. It's going to change the American landscape. Ford and his production of the automobile changes everything. Because you have to think now that anybody can own a car, anybody can move around the country. That leads to lots of road building, gas stations, okay, all kinds of restaurants and things to feed the people who are running around all over the place. It brings personal mobility in. This is a huge change in American life as people can get out and see the world. Big deal. And a big job producer. Pause here. Charles Lindbergh, one of the most famous Americans of all times, takes his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, you see Lindbergh here, and becomes the first person to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic. He proves that it can be done, and he really opens up a travel between the two continents. Transatlantic passenger flights began in the 20s as people fly back and forth from England to New York and Paris. And as they go back and forth, this is a real big deal. Planes really become into their own during the 20s. Lindbergh, by the way, huge, huge hero. Can't overstate how big of a hero Lindbergh is. He is a huge public personality on par with any celebrity you can think of. Pause here. Election in 1928 brings us Herbert Hoover, who's going to defeat Al Smith. Everybody's pretty satisfied with the country. Republicans are in charge. They're supporting big business. Everything is going great. Interestingly enough, Smith is the first Catholic president nominee from a major party. Smith gets crushed, by the way. Hoover wins, and everything seems to be going great as we enter 1928. Everything is wonderful and everything is good. Okay, the roaring 20s are roaring on, and all is well. Okay. Pause here. That brings us to the end of chapter 17. And you can see the end of the 20s doesn't go so well. When we pick up with chapter 18, you're going to find out that it all falls apart in 1929 as we enter the Great Depression.